All right, folks, welcome to Politically Homeless. My name is Dave. I've got a very special guest for our show today. First time I've ever interviewed a presidential candidate. So it's a first for me. Everyone, please welcome presidential candidate Mike Maat. Mike, how are you?
Good, David. Thanks for having me on. I hope this is not the last time you interview a presidential candidate. I hope you and I can discuss this in a few months and maybe a couple times between now and November 5.
Yeah, I will hold you to that. If you're at the finals, as what do they call it? Once you're the nominee, right? And then you
Right.
get your
I plan on representing the Libertarian Party during the general election.
there you go. Okay, much better than I was trying to say it there. But you're welcome back here. At that time, I'm sure you won't be picking up any of my phone calls, but that'll be fine. That I could say, hey, I interviewed him before anyone else did. So, Mike, tell us about yourself a little bit. Introduce yourself. Do the Cliff Notes version. I'll just step aside and
Yeah,
let
let's
you
go with
talk.
the Cliff Notes version because I'm over 60 years old, and this could be the worst 10 minutes of your podcasting career if I were to drag out a long discussion of resume, right? The Cliff's Notes version is I grew up as a Republican. I grew up in commercial finance. I worked for a couple banks when I got out of business school and out of engineering school. And then I went back to graduate school and studied economics. So in total, I have 3 graduate degrees. I worked for the White House as an economist for a while. I worked for other agencies. I later worked in Washington as a professional advocate for free markets and greater competition and less regulation. I later, with a partner of mine, we launched our own business. We were entrepreneurs in the industry of educating financial services executives and providing strategic consulting to financial institutions and some nonprofits. I've taught economics at 3 different universities, mostly international finance. And then as a second career, I worked for 11 and a half years as a police officer from the age of 49 to 60 in South Florida in Broward County, if anyone knows South Florida.
Mm-hmm.
All as a registered libertarian, a tremendous experience. As you might imagine, an interesting experience being a libertarian as a law enforcement officer. And like any new career, it's never exactly the way that you anticipated it. But I absolutely fell in love with the job, fell in love with my community, and realized a couple of things. One is that if you were not a professional economist before becoming a cop will turn you into an economist because you see the effects of bad public policy up close and personal. And it makes you realize, too, that the war on drugs doesn't work. It's dopey. It makes you realize that a lot of the ways that law enforcement is managed, both at the agency level and at the officer level, is dopey, and we need profound change. And that's why I spend so much time talking about criminal justice reform. So, I've run for Congress before, representing the Libertarian Party, and now I am seeking the Libertarian Party's presidential nomination, which will take place May 26th, coincidentally in Washington, D.C., and I hope to talk to you after that during the general election cycle.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. So you were in Florida. Where are you now, Mike?
I am in Virginia. I am in the middle of nowhere, or I should say eastern nowhere, in the northeast corner of Virginia. We're about 2.5 hours east of Washington, D.C., maybe an hour and a half east of Richmond, maybe 2.5 hours north of Norfolk, if anyone knows those places. It's pretty hard to describe because there's nothing out here.
Yeah, it must be a nice change of pace though after the hustle. I mean, I'm in Southwest Florida,
Fantastic.
so the Florida, everybody is coming here, and if they're not here, they're on their way. So
You're
it's
exactly right. It is
yeah.
it is lovely. It is a cultural adjustment. It's 45 minutes to get to the Walmart. But if you plan your trips well, um, it's a lifestyle adjustment worth making.
It's like a day trip. Come on, honey, we're going to Walmart. It's gonna take a
We
while.
we plan it a week in advance. It's absolutely true.
Wow. All right. Well, I guess the 5 minute ride that I have, I guess I should be grateful for that. All right, Mike. So we're going to dive right into the issues now that we've put everyone to sleep. But your background, I have to say, listening to you, um, being a college grad that I am, that's about all I could say. Management degree that I never put to use. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking this guy might be qualified for this office. So I'm already. I mean, not to throw too much shade at the two other guys in the, Biden and Trump, but it kind of sounds like you might have a little inside to the presidency there because of your background. I mean, your law enforcement background, your education. It'd be nice to have a president who was smart. I'm just putting it out there.
Well, I won't try to take too much credit. Let's just say that we have personal characteristics that don't completely overlap with the other candidates. Let's just leave it at that.
Oh, this could become a comedy hour here. All right, so let's move along to make it a little bit more serious. So the first topic on my list, as we discussed in the pre-show, Mike, is immigration. There's a crisis at our southern border. You're a libertarian. All right. I hate to do this to you, but libertarians I've spoken with before have said things to me like, hey, I'm for open borders and we need all of these people here for the economy. And then they don't do any kind of nuance or say, but we need to do this, that, or the other. It's just, hey, dude, hey, bro, we're leaving it open. What say you, Mike Termott?
I appreciate that. Immigration is good for us, and it's a complicated issue. So I'm going to give you all the nuance that you're interested in. I promise, notwithstanding the fact that I love you and your program, I promise not to call you dude or bro. Right. I also want your audience to know that our pre-show discussion consisted of 90 seconds of you telling me like 5 minutes ago, this is what I'm going to ask you. Let's go. I don't want your folks to think that, we planned and plotted this out.
I'm not that organized.
Yeah, well, good point. I wouldn't have been able to handle it any differently if you had given me the questions a month ago. It wouldn't change anything. Look, immigration is good for the United States. It's good for America. But it needs to be said that legal immigration is good for America. Illegal immigration is bad for America. And let me explain what I mean by that. First of all, it is true that immigration is good for America. It is good for us culturally. It is one of those things that differentiates us from most major democracies around the world. It is good for us in an entrepreneurial sense. It is good for us economically, and it is good for us financially, even at the government level, as long as you don't do something stupid like give away free checks, right?
Yeah.
Giving away free money is stupid on a couple of different levels. Number one, it is not an ethical proposition to take money away from people who are born in the United States or other immigrants who are already in the United States and forcibly, I might add, take money from them and then give it to other people, whoever those other people are. I don't like the idea of transferring money forcibly from one group of people to another, no matter who those groups are. But it also needs to be said, I believe, that you do not want to be in a position of creating some weird incentive system where you're attracting people from outside the United States to come here for the checks, right? Mm-hmm. Now, we know that most people don't come to the United States for the free checks. They don't come in the United States for welfare. They come here for a lot of other reasons. But why would you want to try to set up an incentive structure to attract people who don't want to work? Like it's completely backwards. It's moronic. Moreover, I would go so far as to say this idea of telling people you can come to the United States but don't work, like you can't work for some period of time, that is completely backwards. I would be more comfortable with a policy that said, I'm going to call you in 6 weeks and make sure you have a job, right? We do not want to be recruiting lazy people. Most of the people that come to the United States are anything but lazy, but we certainly don't want to be in the position of recruiting people who don't want to work. Now, the other thing that needs to be said is that illegal immigration is not good for America, is not good for the United States. And that is true for a couple different reasons. One of the things that I learned most hard, most starkly, and most disturbingly at the border. I visited for a couple of days last year. I guess it was the year before last now. I was down at the Arizona-Mexico border. I met with CBP, with local sheriff's office, with ranchers, with property on the border, and with a number of libertarian thought leaders down there. And one of the things that I really came away having been affected by is learning about the huge problem that we have in human trafficking as a result of the black market created by our stupid federal government policy. Most people who come into the United States come in illegally. And most people who come illegally come using some form of human trafficker. On the other side, it's a gang, it's a coyote. And then in too many cases, they are in effect handed over to someone on the other side, on the American side of the border, using these, telephone-based apps. It is not someone you know. It is not someone that you can trust. It is someone to whom you owe a giant fee. And in all too many cases, this winds up in some form or another of indentured servitude. This is amazingly dangerous. The results are every bit as disgusting on both sides of the border as your imaginations will allow. And I am not going to go into the gory detail. You understand what I'm talking about. In fact, one of the problems that we have at the border is law enforcement officers don't want to stand down from chasing, which is so dangerous, right? Public policy in most communities today, as it was when I was a cop in South Florida, is that we only chase for violent felonies. And yet we do have a problem effectively controlling, especially young law enforcement officers who know damned well that if they don't interrupt the flow from the border to a life of indentured servitude, horrific things will happen to these people. Yeah. And asking a young law enforcement officer to stand down is a very difficult thing to achieve. So I think this is a horrific situation. I think that the government needs to get this under control. As a libertarian, I ask almost nothing of our government, especially our federal government. I wish the whole thing would go away, lock, stock, and barrel. But the one thing that we ask of the federal government is to do a better job of controlling our border and protect our civil liberties. And it has done an ultra crappy job at both of those things at the Mexican border. So the answer is, David, the public policy answer is that we need to do two things simultaneously. One is we need to get control of the border so as to discourage illegal immigration, which is so bad for the people coming in. By the way, when you bring people in who are not able to legally work, this is what leads to the abuse of these folks by employers, especially big companies, especially in agriculture, but in other ways too. This is what depresses our wage rate. When you have people who are forced effectively into the shadows of the labor market, working for incredibly depressed wages, this is what undermines the wage structure for everybody. So this is not good for the labor market. It's not good for people who are born in the United States. It's not good for the immigrants. And we need to shut down human trafficking completely. So the first thing we need to do is dedicate. You're not going to hear me or any other libertarian say this too often. We need to redeploy the resources required to get a handle on and discourage illegal immigration. Now, on the legal side, I believe that we need to deploy the technology and the resources required to get this right, because we should be vetting people into the United States faster, not slower. Mm-hmm. One piece of discouraging illegal immigration is to getting legal immigration rolling, right? Part of the reason we have so much illegal immigration is because the legal immigration system sucks. It just doesn't work very well. This whole idea of, it takes weeks, days, months, years to vet someone into the United States, that is utter, unadulterated BS. Yeah, there is no reasonable way to argue it should take that long. Either you're on a list or you're not. If you're on a list of wanted fugitives, if there's a felony warrant in your home country, and I realize what I'm talking about fixing would require an interface with these nations' databases that we do not do a very good job of today. So we need to fix that. If you're on that list, okay, I get that. If you're on a list of known terrorists, and by the way, that's a whole nother discussion, is there's probably a lot of people on that list that shouldn't be. But okay, if you're on some list of people that we know are dangerous, that we should not be allowing to immigrate to the United States, then I get that. We should be not allowing those people in. But if you're not on a list, we should be vetting people in rapidly. And the objective, the goal should be able to be to do that, in a day, right? Not
Sure.
in a year. And this whole idea of, you're going to show up at a hearing later on, no incentive for anyone to show up at that hearing. It's completely dopey. I don't believe we should be discriminating against people who want to come here for economic reasons. People who say that they're here to seek asylum, the reason they claim that is because our law is so fragmented that they have to find some weird reason. Look, if you're from Latin America, I already know you want to come here for economic reasons, and so would you or I, David. I mean,
Right.
if you're out there, if you're living in
Venezuela,
yeah, right, and you're not thinking about coming to the United States, what is wrong with you, right?
Yeah.
You and I would run that border
Sure.
10 times out of 10.
Yeah.
There's no question. You and I would be boosting each other over the damned wall and throwing our kids over to follow.
Yeah.
That's how we would run that program. And this idea of prosecuting people, or worse, tracking them down after the fact for doing something that you and I would do, to be honest, you and I would do it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question in my mind that
I agree. I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have the.
So, but you wouldn't send a deportation force like out there after the fact. I think Trump has been saying this stuff, and I'm like, wow. I mean, it's a lot of these people start families, they start businesses. I'm okay with, if you're a productive citizen and you've come here to contribute, because that was the initial hope, right? That was the initial promise. You come to America for a better life that you create as the individual, not the government doesn't create it for you. You don't sit on a program for your entire life and just, you're on the dole. Hate to use that expression, but that's kind of what it is. But man, I mean, it seems kind of vindictive after the fact. It's like vengeance. We're gonna send you all back. Which, I mean, I've seen some heartbreaking. I saw a pastor of a church. I think it was, the guy was, he'd been at this church for years, and then all of a sudden, his number came up basically, and they were trying to send him back to wherever. I mean,
I think it's insane for all of the reasons you pointed out, but I also think it's insane from the standpoint that the government is complicit in these people coming in the first place.
Right.
The incentive structure that people are going to want to come to the United States by not controlling our border, which is an option, right? I mean, it is not true that we couldn't control that if we wanted to.
Mike, is this a stroke of the pen, or is this Congress? What I mean, because Trump did something and then Biden undid it. I mean, you're a smart guy.
There's a combination of things. It is true that Biden undid some Trump policies that were better suited for discouraging people to come across the border. There's no question about that. It is also the case that we need to redeploy some resources. I make no secret of the fact that I want to cut back on our military spending by most, right? I believe that our military spending ought to be a small fraction of what we spend today. That is an easy, intellectually easy redeployment of resources to get control of that border. We should not be allowing people to come in illegally. And when you do so, when you allow them to come in illegally, you are complicit in these people coming in, starting lives, and then what? You decide, now we're going to deploy the resources to send you back.
Yeah.
We didn't want to deploy the resources to keep you from coming in, but now and by the way, the deportation process is incredibly expensive. First of all, you have to dedicate all the resources to tracking people down, then going to get them, then to jail them, then hearing after hearing, and then the deportation itself. It is a much thriftier process to keep people from coming in across the border in the first place illegally.
Thrifty. That's a good word. Any other comments on this as we maybe wrap
Like
this?
I say, I really believe that immigration, when done right, when done legally, is good for America. And so I believe that we need to have more immigration, not less. But it has to be the way that we all want it to be: rapid, vetted, and legal to work.
Right. And I just would add one little caveat or comment to this, is that it seems as though the media and maybe the two parties have successfully weaponized this issue in a way that pits human beings against other human beings. I mean, I've felt this, like, why are they coming here? I mean, you get this animosity towards other people who are, like you said, you know, if it was you or I, and I think you made a really good point there, that we would try to do the best for our families to escape whatever tyranny that you know, had befallen us. And right now we've got this immigration debate, right? And you know, it goes back and forth. Trump wants to do something. Biden said he was going to do something, didn't do something. Now Trump's going to hold on to that issue. And you come along and you say, you know, we can kind of do both. We can be humanitarians. We can look at other people as human beings and not as, you know, cattle or whatever. And we can also fix the problem. And you said the word a couple of times, resources. And that's interesting that you're a libertarian and you're saying, let's dedicate some resources. I think that moves you in and I think a pretty sweet spot as far as doing both of these things, and not just saying we need to, you know, send them all back and say mean things about certain people of certain races or nationalities, which personally I just find that just horrible that that's where we're at. But last word on immigration here.
There's a lot of nationalism involved, and a lot of people just don't care enough, I believe, about the people who come in illegally. You are doing people no favors when you effectively encourage or at least allow people to come in illegally. You're not doing them a favor. You'd be doing them a favor to fix the system and get them in legally.
All right. All right. Good discussion. Now, our next topic, not much easier, but I want to talk about inflation, the economy, spending. I think you mentioned that you wanted to cut spending in certain areas, Mike. You're a libertarian. This is one thing I love about libertarians. Libertarians aren't using a little scalpel. They're going in there with a chainsaw and they're going to do some damage. Now, wouldn't this destroy everything, Mike, if we start like eliminating government programs or agencies like the Department of Education, Mike? I mean, they're doing so much good for humanity, right? They're bringing such great ideas to the classroom today, especially elementary school kids, right? They're teaching the basics. And so I'm throwing the floor over to you. I've set this up in a way maybe I shouldn't have gone down this road. But Mike, tell us, what can we do? We know Trump did the CARES Act, which was $8 trillion. Biden comes along and does another $7.5 trillion for whatever. I don't know what it was for. Infrastructure, he said. It was infrastructure. So I'll let you take the floor.
Infrastructure.
Yeah, it's bunny infrastructure, as we call
it. Yeah, bunny infrastructure, bunny structure.
Yeah.
Look, there is so much there to unpack. Let's start with the basics. Number one, there really is no economic or philosophical reason why the government should be involved in education at all. And I do believe in the long run. And I don't know whether the long run is 15 years or 150 years. But in the long run, education is going to look much more like other businesses, which is to say, you won't have monopolies. You won't have dominance by the government. You will have competition. You will have higher pay for teachers. You'll have greater choice for families. and you'll have greater competition for the best teachers, and the worst teachers will be fired and they'll get paid more money. That's the way we're going, and that's where we want to go. Now, how you get there is, I believe, number one, you have to create greater competition among the schools themselves, right? So sometimes that looks like voucher programs, sometimes that looks like charter schools. But fundamentally, this idea of raising money at the local level and then making it available only to public schools is stupid.
Yeah.
You would not do that for any other business. You would not say, well, the city is interested in providing garbage pickup. We're going to pass state law that says the city can only hire its own employees to do this. It cannot hire a contractor. You would say, that sounds pretty dumb. I want the option to hire out whatever firm is good at this, right? This is the way that we want it to work in education. By the way, it is also perfectly parallel to how we want to change the way that we employ law enforcement agencies as well. We want a city or a county, for example, to have a choice, whereas most communities don't have much choice. You got the sheriff's office, love it or shove it. Some places have a choice between the sheriff's office and the police department, but we want robust competition there. The reason you want competition is not only so that, if you got a crappy school, you can opt out and crappy schools need to go away in the long run and opt into a better school, but also because families are different, kids are different, objectives are different, situations are different. You want to be able to align your family, your kid, and by the way, homeschooling needs to be included as an option as well.
Yep.
You want to be able to align whatever you believe is the best solution for you and your family and your kid with the school of your choice. That might be a public school. In the long run, I don't think it will be. I think public schools will be outcompeted and go away completely. Could be a Catholic school, could be a Lutheran school, could be a non-denominational, could be a non-religious school, could be something in the private sector that's not associated with any faith-based organization. There could be different educational attitudes and philosophies, different focus on different topics, subjects, skills, methodologies.
Yep.
We want this competition. Yeah, we want this type of competition. There's no logical reason why you would say only one organization is allowed to run schools in this town. And even if you believe such a thing, even if you believe monopolies are good, which would be a weird thing to say, even if you believe we're only going to allow one organization to run the schools in this town, there's no logical reason why you would decide that should be the government, right? So it's a failure in a couple of different ways. And because we now know that empirically speaking, we're collecting data now. We know that competition works. We know that improvements really are made when there's competition. Because we now know that, the idea of not allowing competition is unethical, in my view. This is no longer a math problem. This is no longer an economics problem, right? This is no longer a problem that you should need, to go to business school to understand. You don't need to, you don't need a PhD in education structure to understand. We now know that things are made better when there's greater competition. And so if you're precluding competition in your county, in your town, I've got an ethical problem with that. And I believe that in the long run, we'll move in the direction of competition. I believe that what that will result in is public schools diminishing in size and eventually going away and the private sector taking over. I also predict in the long run that it is likely that public financing will diminish and possibly go away completely in some places. That'll be completely left up to the private sector, but that's another chapter for the future. I also believe, David, that all of these decisions need to be made at the local level, preferably by individual families. But to the extent to which we still have public schools, we still have public school systems, we still have boards of directors. They need to be able to make decisions at the local level. You don't want a state, the state of Florida or the state of California, or the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, to be making decisions about how to run a local school board. Those should reflect the interests of the local culture, the local families, and we want people to be able to pursue different avenues, if for no other reason than to see how well things work. And so I'm not a big fan of, for example, in Florida, we had Ron DeSantis in effect telling boards of directors, this is how you're going to do things. Even though there were cases, there were certain circumstances in which I thought that that's probably a good idea, right? That might not be a bad idea. I don't want the governor making those decisions. I want local school boards making those decisions. And I want those local school boards to be controlled by family participation, by their customers, right? That's the way this should work. And even worse than the state telling school boards how to behave is the idea of the federal government telling states to tell school boards this is how it's going to go. There is no logical reason. There is no ethical reason. There is no economic reason.
They hold
they
hold funding over their heads if they don't do what the government says.
Horrible. There is no reason for the federal government to be involved. This whole idea of we tax you and then we give you your money back, but with strings attached. How is that supposed to make my life better? You've just told me you don't trust me to make decisions for myself, you know, as a family with school-age kids. You don't want me making decisions. You don't even want my school board to make decisions for it. You don't even want my state to make decisions for itself.
Right.
The federal government, for some reason, has decided that it knows better. And by the way, as dopey and unethical as that all sounds, we also know objectively at this point, we know empirically that the federal government has made a whole lot of dumb decisions in the past. So this idea of taxing us and giving us the money back through block grants, for example, is really dumb. There is no reason why we should have a Department of Education. There's no reason for it to exist. It needs to go away completely.
All right. What other departments would you think about maybe eliminating or scaling down?
Yeah, all of them. Well, look, you need it. Let's think about what it is that you would want to retain, because it's a shorter list. And
okay, you know, that's better. Yeah.
We need to wrap up your program sooner than tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, we already have gone over. No, I'm kidding, but we are. I could tell it's a robust discussion. We want to, get all the points out there.
We need to thrash this out. It is a shorter list of what you would want to retain. I don't mind retaining much of the State Department because I'm a big believer that communication with other nations' governments is one of the ways that we can avoid armed conflict in the future. A lot of what it is that we communicate, I've got a problem with, right? I believe in free trade. I believe in not getting us involved in these relationships that oblige us to go to war. But the State Department is something worth retaining. The Treasury Department, I've got a problem with because it borrows so much money, but that's not because of the Treasury Department, right? The Department of Energy has a piece that you need to retain to keep control of nuclear weapons. I wish that we could cut these all back and get better military control over them. I do believe it has to be controlled by elected officials, but the rest of the Department of Energy and all of its policy needs to go away to the extent to which it has any effect over our sourcing of energy for the private sector is, wow. No economic reason, a lot of empirical evidence to suggest that they have screwed things up. No ethical reason why they should be involved with our lives. So all of that needs to go away. Similarly, all of the Department of Commerce has to go away. So what are we retaining here? We're retaining a little bit of the Defense Department, but that is to stop projecting military hegemony around the world. We do want a defense posture to protect the homeland of the United States. both physically and in a cybersecurity sense. So I would readjust the priorities of the Defense Department and pare it way back. We got to get rid of the Federal Reserve System, lock, stock, and barrel. We can talk about that in a moment. Yeah, I can't think of too much else you would want to retain. There is no reason why the federal government should be involved in law enforcement. There's very little reason to include a Department of Justice. A federal watchdog to make sure that civil liberties are protected in the individual states, I'm okay with. I'm not okay with the rest of what the FBI does. To the extent to which the FBI thinks there is a role to play in anti-espionage, if they are right, and I believe that in 8 cases out of 10 they are wrong, but to the extent to which they are right, I believe that should be transferred to the Defense Department. The other part of your question, David, is inflation. And inflation comes from bad Federal Reserve policy. The Federal Reserve has only a handful of responsibilities, and I believe that they mishandle each and every one of them. Number one is controlling our monetary base, controlling our currency, controlling, in effect, interest rates and the rate of inflation. And I think that most people in your audience would agree that the idea of locking up a dozen people in a room every 6 weeks and asking what mood they're in is probably not a good way to set any price. You would not set the price of strawberries that way, right? Why would we think that's a good way to set interest rates or to set the value of the dollar? This is a bad methodology. I'm not suggesting that they make bad decisions. They do, by the way. They make horrifically bad decisions from time to time. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the methodology by which they make these decisions is completely dopey. Yeah. We need to end the idea of discretionary monetary policy and replace it with a rules-based system. And to do that, you do not need a Federal Reserve System. The other thing that the Fed does is it regulates banks, which leads to, and by the way, you do not need the federal government to regulate banks. Banks can decide on their own what kind of regulatory structure they want. They can decide on their own whether to hire an accounting firm to make all the revelations that they would want to make regarding their financial structure and performance so that investors can make decisions on their own. And if they want to participate in the FDIC to offer their depositors protection, they can do that. They do not need to be regulated by the Federal Reserve System. And the problem is that when you opt into Fed regulation, it comes with this idea that the Fed is going to make decisions on whether or not to bail you out. This is enormously expensive and sets up horrific incentive structures for bankers to take undue risks, knowing that their investors will get bailed out at the last minute, which, of course, sets up an incentive structure that's completely antithetical to good performance of financial institutions. And the last thing that I would add about the Fed, and one of the last reasons we need to get rid of the Fed, is because the Fed controls competition among currencies. The Fed today is on the verge of issuing its own blockchain technology-based digital currency. It already has it up and running for commercial transactions in a testing environment. It claims that it's waiting for enabling federal legislation to roll it out in a retail sense. I fear that it will eventually get tired of waiting and will roll it out anyway. But we need to keep the Fed out of digital currency. It would run competing currencies like Bitcoin out of the market and Ethereum out of the market. This is not what we want. And that's for 2 reasons. Number one, we want all those other currencies to be able to compete. Let the best currency win, right? Mm-hmm. We do not know exactly how these technologies are going to play out in the advent of the smart economy. And we want them to develop in the most effective way possible so that our economy can run as efficiently and robustly as possible and grow as much as possible. But the other thing that needs to be said, and I'm guessing a lot of your audience is aware of this problem, once you invite the Fed into running its own digital currency, that means the Fed will be able to collect data on every transaction conducted using this currency. and not just metadata, but actual data. Who's making the transaction, for how much money, and for what?
Right.
And I don't think that anyone should be tricked into believing that the Fed would not hand over that data to any element of the federal government, whether it's Treasury, Justice, or anybody else. Your privacy is done for if you use these currencies and they are issued by the federal government of the United States. And for this reason, we need to keep it away from the private sector. We need to keep the Fed from issuing these currencies and allow Bitcoin and Ethereum and others to compete and possibly win. So I believe we got to get rid of the Fed. We need to cap spending by the federal government. All spending by the government is theft. It is, for every dollar the government spends, it is $1 of resources that does not go to something more useful. Whether that is paid for through taxes, whether it is paid for by inflation, by the Federal Reserve System, buying debt issued by the Treasury Department, or whether it's financed by debt that is eventually paid for by our children and grandchildren. All of it is theft of resources from American citizens and, to a certain extent, citizens around the world. And we've got to cap it, pare it back, and for the most part, end it over the next generation.
Wow. All right. Well, very complete answer. And I guess that segues into our next topic to some degree, because you're talking about spending, and we've got a real problem in this country with war, and we've had a big problem with war for a very long time, Mike. Right now in Congress, they're battling it out, whether we should send money to Ukraine and how much. Should we send money to Israel? How much? And if you don't want to send money to Israel, then you're likely deemed a bad word, which I won't say here, but I mean, I think the audience knows where I'm going with that. And it's bizarre because you can oppose something without disliking certain groups of people. This is a new thing to me, and I'm trying to think through it. But and we're also in conflicts in other places that people have completely forgotten about. Every so often you'll hear, oh, something happened in Somalia the other day, for instance. I don't know. I'm just throwing that particular place out there because every so often it's like, well, what are we doing there? And why, what's going on there that we have troops stationed over there that are going to be in like a hot war zone, albeit maybe briefly, but it's we're so spread out and in so many different places that people forget about it. And it's just like, the United States, we're the leader of the free world, Mike, and this is what we do because we're morally superior than all the other countries. And we've done such a good job over the years proving how morally superior we are that this is our policy. And what's really sad is that the majority, this is where you get agreement in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. They typically have the votes every single time. And you're like, so we're sending another $8 billion to Ukraine. And they just voted for it. And the president signed it. I mean, this is the only bill they can pass. It seems like this sails right through. Mike Johnson.
It's because they're spending other people's money. It turns out to be relatively easy to spend someone else's money.
Yeah.
If there's anything I hear on TV that makes my skin crawl, it is when somebody in the media says Congress has now given money to, right? Really?
Yeah.
Really? Because I didn't see their pockets being emptied. Look, there's a lot to unpack there.
Sorry.
Let's start with the idea that taking money from Americans, including families who can least able to afford it, taking money forcibly, by the way, right? And using it to foster war elsewhere, using it to project military hegemony around the world, using it to support other people's wars, however you feel about them. This is an ethical problem. This is not merely a math problem, right? This is not a problem that you should be looking to some Treasury Department economist, as much as I love my fellow nerds around the world. This is not something you should be asking a mathematician to solve for you. This is a values problem. This is an ethics problem. And I believe that the way that we conduct foreign policy is a failure to align our policy with the values of American people. This is a real problem in a fundamental level. However you think things have gone, we're going to talk about that. But however you think that things have gone as a practical matter, it needs to be said that if you were in charge, this is not the way that you would be running things. You would not take money from your neighbors, from your friends, from people you don't know, from rich people, middle-class people, and people struggling to make ends meet. This is not what you would do. You would not do that. You would not take money from people and use it to project military hegemony. You would not use it to make sure that a war keeps going or that it goes in the direction that you wish it would go. You would not use it for foreign aid. If you could look the families in the eye from whom you are taking these resources, you would not take it away from those people and send it to other families around the world. This is not an ethical proposition. It's not what you would do. I realize in the case of Israel, it feels different, right? There are, for any number of people, it feels different because it feels more personal. I myself have traveled Israel north, south, east, west, right? I've traveled with my son throughout Israel, including Palestinian territories outside of Israel. I have sent my son to train in Jordan. I've sent my daughter to her friend's bat mitzvah in Israel. So I get that it feels personal. You know, there are people on my team who have family there. I get it. It feels different. But this is one of the reasons why we need to take this opportunity to say that our policy needs to be run on basis of principle. It can't be run on the basis of how we feel about a group of people, right? We cannot say, as certain politicians do, I'm opposed to war, I'm opposed to foreign aid, I'm opposed to proxy war. But in the case of Israel, right? In the case of Israel, it's different. As a matter of principle, the United States needs to avoid tying its foreign policy to the foreign policy of others, either through foreign aid. We've given billions of dollars to Israel on an annual basis for decades. We've given billions of dollars to other players in the area, including, in the past, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Palestinian Authority, local governments in the area, the national governments in the surrounding areas. We've given tremendous amounts of money. Empirically speaking, you have to admit that we have not purchased influence with that money. It just hasn't happened. We are not able to call the shot. We're not even able to influence how many of those even conversations go, much less how those actions go. The President of the United States was snubbed for a meeting with a Jordanian government, a government that we have supported financially. It is clear that we are not getting, not just a bang for our buck, we're not getting a penny for our buck in terms of foreign aid. But what do we get? We get the liability of being tied to their decisions. The American people deserve a foreign policy that is not linked to the foreign policies of other nations. And by the way, and I would argue that the national government of the state of Israel has learned this year. I don't believe I'm not in the business of advising other countries, right? Their governments. So no one is listening to me. But by the way, I believe that one of the things that will come out of this is a whole lot of nations are going to decide, yeah, I'm not sure taking American money is really worth it, because it ties us to the Americans as well, and in ways that probably doesn't make sense for them. They ought to be able to make foreign policy as they say fit on the basis of their own interests and do as good a job of aligning those interests with the values of their populations without being influenced by the United States. And the United States government will try to influence you in different directions from time to time. There will be times the United States government is telling you, stand down, right? Which may or may not be the right decision, but there may be circumstances in which your national government wants to do what it wants to do, and influence from the American government doesn't make sense for you. There will be other times when the United States government, in effect, is bribing you to keep going. Like, why are you negotiating? Why are you standing down? We're in a proxy war with Russia. We want you to keep going. Because American politicians are finally admitting out loud, and have been for months now, that the war in Ukraine, the American participation in the war in Ukraine, is motivated to degrade the capabilities of the Russian government. Now, is it in the interest of the Ukrainian people to effectively be used in a proxy war in order to degrade the capabilities of the Russian army? That's not clear to me. And again, I'm not in the business of advising foreign governments. But if I were, I would be telling governments like that in Ukraine, you've got to seriously think about what's in the long-term interest of your population. Because you should not accept it as being obvious that just because the American government is willing to pay you for taking a certain course of action, that aligns with your own interests. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But you need to insulate yourself from being bribed to suppress whatever weight you would put on doing the right thing by your people. That's a very, very tricky set of decisions. And I believe that these governments need to de-link in terms of us trying to bribe our way into influencing these people when it's clear that we're doing a crappy job of it. Specifically, I think that we need to take a very different posture in the China Sea. I think that we need to take a different posture in the Ukrainian war, in the Middle East. I think that we need to avoid getting into these proxy wars. We need to avoid policies that we have been adopting right and left around the world, to your point, David, that increase the chances of going to war, and in some cases, increase the chances of engaging in a world war, in a broad theater conflict, possibly a multi-theater conflict. Specifically, I would not be giving money to the Ukrainian government. I don't think this election is going to be about whether it should be 100 billion or 150 billion or 200 billion. I think this election is going to be about big ideas, including the idea that we should not be giving $1 to the Ukrainian government. I also think that we should be standing down regarding Taiwan. We have gotten ourselves into a self-fulfilling prophecy. We have, in effect, over the last 3 generations said, not out loud, but we have effectively said that we would protect Taiwan from conflict with the People's Republic of China. This is why so much investment has taken place in Taiwan. If you are making an investment in Taiwan because you believe that you need to invest in a place where the American military will protect you come hell or high water.
Yeah.
Maybe I can interest you in a place like Milwaukee, right? Which is a place the American government should be protecting come hell or high water. Taiwan is not. And now we're into this self-fulfilling prophecy where we believe that we need to protect Taiwan because of all the investment that's gone on there. We believe that it's important to us in technological development. We believe it's key to our supply chains. We believe that we have military interests. And I believe that we need to unwind that and immediately end this dopey idea of not being clear, right? And I believe that we need to be clear right now and to begin the process of unwinding. The Chinese government's long-term interest is in effectively repatriating Taiwan, but not going to war with the United States. They may be willing to go to war over this, but I think that we can avoid that if we change course today.
Yeah. Well, from just the basic standpoint of an American citizen, you talk about somebody who's just trying to make ends meet. They keep hearing this on television. They're not thinking of geopolitics or a lot of the nuance that you just brought to the conversation. What they're thinking about is, how come they're spending all of this money? That's all that, and it's kind of like the blind man who could see argument. It's like, how come they keep spending this money on all of these different places, but yet, our infrastructure here locally is crumbling, or, like the federal highway system or whatever it is that you could apply that to. You could say, you could have a progressive come along who is equally anti-interventionist and say, we could at least bring that money back home and take care of the things that need to be taken care of. But we keep hearing over and over again, it's like, it's kind of a form of gaslighting that, we are still the shining city on the hill, and we're still going to do what we've done now for the past 50 or so years. And that's, we're going to run around the world and make other countries, and you alluded to this in Ukraine, that now Ukraine kind of owes us because we're doing this for them. But a lot of Americans, just your Joe Sixpack, comes home from a long day of work, pops on the TV, watches a little bit of news, and is like, okay, again, we're sending another 8 billion, and the news media gleefully reports it, and Congress goes ahead, and it's the only thing they seem to get accomplished. And I just find this appalling. I mean, and not even on the level that you explained it, just the fact that Americans are thinking to themselves, I didn't vote for this. This isn't what I wanted. I sent a representative to Washington, D.C., and they're telling me back how this is good for me. How is
and I think most Americans recognize that it's a load of crap. David, I just don't think that there are counter examples out there anymore. I don't think that there are examples to which Americans would point and say, there's an example of a military intervention that it cost us billions of dollars and thousands of lives, but it was worth it, right? It achieved something that I recognize as being in our long-term national interest and my interest personally for me and my family. I don't think that there are those examples. And by the way, in the case of Afghanistan and Iraq, sadly, we're not talking about the loss of billions of dollars. We're talking about trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about the loss of thousands of lives. We're talking about the loss of over 1 million lives. This does not align with the values of the American people. And again, like I've said before, this is not just a math problem, right? This is not a military tactics problem. This is an ethical problem.
Yeah. Well, super well said. This is kind of a topic which has now, I think, started to get the attention of people in both political parties, but not to the extent to where it needs to be. And because you're running for president, and there is a third choice out there. In case people didn't know, there might be 4 choices, 5 choices, but choose carefully, choose wisely, and choose based on your own interests, your own financial interests. So let's go to the next one. We got 2 more technically. Let's see if we can get through these 2. We've already gone way over our time limit here, but I had written down here medical accountability, and you wanted me to be a little bit more specific on that. So I'm talking about the great 2020. It was such a great year for me personally, Mike. I really enjoyed it. I was told to stay indoors. I was told that there was a product that later on that I was supposed to get, this super safe and effective product, which, YouTube is okay with this now. I can say this. I'm not sure that product was all that safe and effective. All right. Now, even if it was a magic bullet, however you want to describe it, Mike, I was being told by the government that in order for me to go to work, in order for me to go to a concert, Mike, I had to flash a QR code or have a card. I had a little laminated card, and I was going to go see the Eagles in concert, love the band, pay like $300 for a ticket, and then I have to be scanned through. And gee, wonder where that scan goes, by the way. Who gets to see that I've scanned that card through? Mike, what the hell happened in 2020? And how can we stop this from happening again?
David, you cannot trust your government. And part of the reason you know that is because they sure as hell don't trust you.
Correct.
I really believe that you're onto something here. I offer the following thought experiment. Imagine that there were, as you put it, the magical product, right?
Yes.
Imagine that there were a perfect vaccine, perfect in every way. Imagine that the vaccine 100% will save your life. And by the way, if you don't take it, 100% chance you're going to die. It shuts down transmissibility 100%. There are no side effects. It's been tested long-term, short-term, and it's completely free, by the way. If there were such a magical vaccine, thought experiment, would the government have the authority to tell you that you have to take it under coercion of losing your job, or even a bribe, or a penalty if you didn't take it, or not letting you go see the Eagles, about which I would be very, very sad, because I agree with you. It's one of the great bands of all time. Children, ask your parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're dating ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, right. The answer has to be no. The answer has to be no.
Thank you.
And so in this sense, I believe that this is truly not a science debate, right? This is not a medical debate. This is a debate about our civil liberties. It's a debate about what it is that we're going to allow the government to tell us what we can do and what we cannot do. Even if you believed that the vaccine were all that, the government doesn't have the right to tell you to take it. The fact that we now find out after the fact, as many people suspected during the fact, that the vaccine wasn't all that. Right? And there were side effects, that there were important costs, that there were all kinds of research elements that were not revealed to us. Now that we know, now you realize the government agencies involved, the individuals involved, these are not people whom you should be trusting. Certainly not a system that you would set up if what you cared about were the transmission of good information and setting up a system that would be insulated from corruption. This is not how you would set up a system. I believe that we need a complete separation of science and state, the same way that we need a complete separation of church and state. We need the government not to be in the business of regulating or even to be paying for the development of medicines, vaccines, setting up regulations. And by the way, this whole idea of the government being not only smart enough to tell you to take a vaccine, that you have to take a vaccine, but the government being smart enough to determine what businesses should be closed, that any businesses should be closed. Wow.
Right.
It's not merely unconstitutional, which it is, it's horrifically unconstitutional. But you should not need to be a constitutional scholar. You should be able to live in a nation without a constitution at all and recognize that's a bad idea. Recognize that's just an ethical problem. The idea that someone else, much less a government with a monopoly on the use of force, but that anyone else should be able to tell you that you need to shut your business. People should be able to make decisions for themselves. I have the right to make whatever dopey decision that I want to make. And by the way, when it comes to, things medical, I make my decisions the same way I believe every married American man should make his decisions. My wife tells me what to do. And I resent this idea that the federal government thinks it's as smart as Nancy is.
Right.
That's just a horrific idea. So I do believe that we need separation. And I think that there are a number of candidates out there. I'm not in the business of naming names, but there's at least one candidate out there positioning himself as an alternative, as a presidential candidate, who is against the vaccines, right? And the vaccine mandates. But I get the impression that the reason he is against the vaccine mandates is because he doesn't like the vaccines themselves. And that makes me worry because
Yeah.
what it says is, what if the vaccines were better? What if the vaccines were terrific? What if he loved the vaccines? Does that mean he'd be okay with the vaccine mandate? And that's why you and I need to really focus on, as you put it, the magical product. Even if it existed, we have to resist the idea of the government telling us what to do.
Right. Well, I mean, I have memories, Mike, of the yellow crime scene tape up around the playground across the street from where I live.
Horrible.
My son was 7, 8 years old at the time, my youngest son, and you go over there, and we didn't take. We should have documented better all of these things. Just in they put up little signs telling you the danger, and you know it was surreal. It was dystopian, surreal, all those words you hear all the time now. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to ever go through that again. That was, you know, I grew up, you had the space shuttle Challenger blowing up. You had some things that happened in your life that you remember, and you think to yourself, wow, I hope that doesn't happen again. If 2020 happens again, Mike, as a country, and never mind just the United States, but all these countries that decided to lock down, and then there was all of this collateral damage, you know, the education of kids, and all of the substance abuse that happened, people very stressed out. I was very stressed out. Thankfully, I'm still here, but I know a number of people who didn't either make it through that very well, or just didn't make it through. Let me just put it that way. And so I think, not that this is the issue of our time, but you could easily, and again, you mentioned one of the alternative presidential candidates. He talks a good game. He's out there, and he's got quite a bit of support, and I wish him well. I'm hoping, you know, that he aligns more to where you're saying that the government has no business in this. Not that, hey, if they make a better product, maybe, you know, then it's okay. And then who decides? It's just the CDC that decides. They haven't been. There's another government agency for you. But I sit here, and that was frightening. That was a frightening event in my life, and personally, I don't want to do that again.
You're right, and I do think that, broadly viewed from 30,000 feet, it is arguably the issue of our time. And I think that there's two schools of thought that are going to be running into each other. On the one hand, you and I learned, and a hell of a lot of other Americans learned, that if it ever looks like we're going in that direction again, and it will, you know, there's going to be another crisis, right? Whether it's a disease or climate change or anything else, there's going to be some fighting. There's going to be a lot more resistance because we'll see it coming. But the other thing that needs to be said is that there's a whole nother school of thought. There's a whole nother learning curve that the people who run governments, elected officials, policymakers, the people that are the heads of these agencies, the CDC, as you put it, these people learned you really can control huge portions of the population, most of the population. You really can get them to take a vaccine. You can get them to shut down their businesses. You can get them to wear a mask. You can get them to change their behaviors. You can get them to stay home from school. You can change their lives if you talk the right game. And they've learned some things too. And so I worry that those types of people are going to come at us with increased veracity in the future, and that it will be us who is up there, you know, fighting an even more ferocious war. And what that looks like is potentially very, very ugly. Yeah.
I kind of know where you're going with that. It's probably why we need the Second Amendment intact and unobstructed again by the government. We didn't really get into that topic, but it's another item maybe for our next chat, Mike. Now I'm ready to wrap up here, but much like a debate, not that you and I have been debating, but I am willing to let you have the closing statement here and tell us why you think you'd be a great president, or your case for wanting to be president of the United States, and just like you would close out a debate with your other libertarian cohorts.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the conversation that we've had today. I think you and I are on the same page regarding a number of topics, and most importantly, the way that we look at the world. I think that that's the way that we need to approach this presidential campaign and election cycle. I don't believe this is going to be about small things. I don't think it's going to be about individual policies. I don't think it's going to be about, to pick a couple of silly examples, I don't think it's going to be about what the retirement age should be for Social Security. It's going to be about who's got the guts to say that it's an evil idea, Social Security, the idea of forcing people into a program that promises them a crappy rate of return. I don't think it's going to be about whether it's 100 or 150 billion dollars to Ukraine, as we discussed earlier. It's going to be about the idea that fostering someone else's war is an ethical failure. It's going to be about big ideas, and some of those ideas are things about which most Americans have grown increasingly disappointed. I think most Americans recognize today that a lot of our most important problems are the result of crappy public policy. I think that if you joined the Republican Party years ago, out of some sense that there would be a politician who would stand up for fiscal conservatism, free trade, open markets, a sense of deregulation, a growing economy, that markets would work better and we'd all make more money, which would not be unreasonable if you looked at the Republican Party a generation or certainly 2 generations ago. If that's why you joined the Republican Party, as I did many, many, many years ago, you and your party have gone in 2 different directions. And your values, your principles actually better align with the Libertarian Party than they do with the Republican Party at that point. And if you're like most of my family, which is to say you joined the Democratic Party years ago, out of some sense that there'd be a politician who would stand up for your civil liberties, who would stand up for your First Amendment rights, wow, you and your party have gone in 2 really different directions.
Mm-hmm.
When I was younger, and again, kids, go ask your parents, you could find a Democratic politician with a clear anti-war message.
Mm-hmm.
To your point earlier, David, that ain't the case today.
No.
I'll give you another weird one. You had mentioned, we almost brought up the Second Amendment. When I was growing up, you could occasionally bump into a Democratic politician who would stand up for your Second Amendment rights.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What, Grandpa?
Exactly.
That has gone by the wayside. These are parties who have people who are members whose values no longer align with those parties.
Mm-hmm.
They better align with the libertarian positions.
Yeah.
And we know from looking at other democracies that this is where authoritarianism comes from. It comes from politicians giving up on their old agenda and adopting instead the idea that what you really have to fear is not the loss of your civil liberties. What you really have to fear is that other idiot coming to power, and I'm here to protect you if you give me, right, the resources, the power, the strength, the political attitude to protect you, I will do so. That's where authoritarianism comes from. You see it growing in the United States now. It's hard to argue that the Democratic Party has a more important objective than just keeping Republicans out of power, and vice versa. That's their number one. It's their number 1, number 2, number 3. It's what they're all about, is staying in power. And so I think that as libertarians, we need to recognize, yes, this is a big opportunity in 2024 because the parties have gone off the rails and because people recognize it and because they each have, to try to be polite about it, strange and unpopular candidates. Let's leave it at that. Okay. It's not merely an opportunity. It's an obligation.
Yeah.
Right. It's an obligation. We as libertarians are the philosophical descendants of the people that put our government together and did so for only one legitimate reason, and that's to protect our civil liberties. If you're waiting for a Republican to try to right this ship, if you're waiting for a Democrat, if you're waiting for a modern politician representing what we call the political duopoly to lead the charge back toward a constitution of delimited powers, to cap federal spending and get inflation under control to stop the wars, I think at this point, arguably, objectively, empirically speaking, you're waiting for something that's not going to happen. And so I think that as libertarians, it's us. It is us. There is no one else. It is up to us to lead that charge. And I think that most Americans are going to recognize that. I think most Americans have a libertarian streak. They wouldn't call it that. Most Americans can't spell libertarianism, have no idea that the Libertarian Party exists. I get that. But most Americans have values that align with libertarianism. What I would argue are traditional American attitudes toward government. And so we will be running on a platform of very, very clear libertarian principles. Folks can learn about it at goldnewdeal.org, because the Gold New Deal is what we call our platform. Obviously, we're poking a little bit of fun at FDR's New Deal. We're poking fun at AOC's Green New Deal. We believe we need a fundamentally different relationship between us and government. Or you can go to MikeTermott.com, which is harder to spell because there's 2 A's in Termott. So it's probably easier just to go to goldnewdeal.org, and those 2 websites toggle back and forth from the campaign website to the Gold New Deal platform. And if anyone wants to reach out, ask questions, get involved with the campaign, or financially support the campaign, you got a few bucks you're trying to get rid of, feel free to reach out and go to the websites.
All right, Mike, excellent discussion. I enjoyed this very much. I learned a lot about you and about these issues that we're wrestling with. I wish you the best out there on the campaign trail. And I hope to talk to you when you're in higher demand come, I don't know, September or October. How's that?
That would be wonderful, David. Thank you for your time. It's a real joy to have been with you and be able to communicate with your audience.